Myles Garrett requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns, and Chicago Bears fans are already photoshopping him into blue and orange. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but don't get your hopes up for this kind of blockbuster deal from Ryan Poles.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. On the show today, we look at the potential, or lack thereof, for a Myles Garrett trade. We'll explain why not only is he not coming to the Chicago Bears, but he's probably not going anywhere from Cleveland, and some of the logistical issues that make this a challenge for the Browns and for the Chicago Bears in a deal like this. We'll look at what that might look like with the Bears, but why this just isn't the right move for this franchise at this time. But hey, the Bears still need to do something to upgrade their pass rush. So we'll take a quick look at some of the other options that are a little bit more realistic and also just maybe a little bit better from a team building standpoint for where this Bears roster is right now. Of course, when a player of the caliber of Myles Garrett, someone who I think should be the Defensive Player of the Year again this year, I don't know if he's going to win it, but certainly I think he played up to that caliber. When he requests a trade, of course, every fan base should be particularly interested in Myles Garrett. Adam Schefter threw out the Bears as a hypothetical, wasn't reporting that the Bears were interested, but was when talking about it on the Pat McAfee show, he mentioned what a team, if you just picked a team like Chicago, for example, and all of a sudden that adds all sorts of fuel to the fire, even though he said on the front end, he's not reporting this, he just was picking a team just as an example. Still, you can sort of connect the dots here, right? Bears need a pass rusher to pair with Montez Sweat. Myles Garrett wants to go to a contending team. You could make the argument that with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen, that this team is about to become a contender and that Myles Garrett could be that piece to put them over the top and unlock the full potential of this Bears defense. The Bears have salary cap space to potentially absorb a Myles Garrett contract and give him a new contract when his contract is up for an extension here. On paper, loosely, you can sort of see why Bears fans would get excited about this, and any opportunity to add a player like this is rare. So go and get him, especially when you add in that some of the reporting from Diana Rossini and other insiders is hey, it's not going to cost you 3 first-round picks to get Myles Garrett at this point. It's a first and a second, or it's a first and 2/3, or first and a player, a first-round pick, and a future draft pick. Right? It's not necessarily going to be over-the-top, back-breaking compensation to be able to get him if he were to be traded. But that's the big if here, right? If he were to get traded. The Cleveland Browns have said they have no interest in trading Myles Garrett. Now, plenty of times teams have said they have no interest in trading a player, and then they do end up trading that player. But one of the bigger challenges here is not just whether the Browns want to trade Myles Garrett, but whether they can trade Myles Garrett, whether they can specifically afford to trade Myles Garrett because of where they stand from a salary cap standpoint. They would need to clear room off of their own books just to be able to trade Myles Garrett away. I'll sort of oversimplify why this is the case, but essentially the Browns over the last few seasons have restructured Myles Garrett's contract to push money into the future and say, we'll pay you more down the line and pay you less this year. You're still going to get the same amount of money. We're just changing when we're going to pay it, so we'll pay you that in the future. Under NFL rules, when you trade a player, that money you've promised them in the future has to then come and be paid to them right away. And so if the Browns were going to trade Myles Garrett, it would cost them over $35 million against their salary cap right away, because all that future money gets brought up to now because they can't pass that on to another team's future books. Like it's money that's beyond what was initially written in the contract. And so it's kind of a complicated salary cap thing. The point being, the Browns don't have the salary cap space right now to trade Myles Garrett. They would get all this dead money on their salary cap instantly the moment they tried to trade Myles Garrett. Now, they could, in theory, cut some players and try and free up some salary cap to then trade Myles Garrett, but they also need that salary cap space to sign other players and keep building their roster. So, like, logistically, it seems very, very difficult, if not impossible, for the Browns to trade away Myles Garrett to the Chicago Bears or anyone else. I mean, we'll see if there's another way they can make that happen. But along with this, like, this to me feels like a little bit of a negotiating tactic from Myles Garrett. He knows right now his salary cap this year is going to be $19 million. Next year, it's going to be $20 million. He's due for more money than that. You know, he's due for a new deal. He's due for a big payday. And you look around some of the other top paid defensive ends in football, Nick Bosa's getting $34 million a year, right? Like, that's sort of the top of the contract market here. Myles Garrett's contract is average $25 a year, but they've kind of brought that down. Montez Sweat's at 24.5, Danielle Hunter's at 24.5. Like, Myles Garrett knows he's arguably the best defensive end in football, and he deserves to be paid more than he's currently being paid. And so one way to generate some leverage is to say, I'm unhappy, trade me, in a means of trying to then get a better contract from Cleveland. Because, like, I understand Myles Garrett puts out the statement and says, you know, to me, it's all about being able to win and contend for Super Bowls, and that, you know, I want to have a better opportunity than what currently presents itself in Cleveland. But I can't help but feel like, man, Myles Garrett has played through and dealt with a lot worse in Cleveland than where they are right now. And I understand, yeah, they're a 3-14 football team. Like, they were a really bad team this year. But, like, they're in the process of turning the corner on the Deshaun Watson era. They're likely to draft a quarterback with their top pick in this draft, with the number 2 overall pick. Like, this is a franchise that it's not going to get worse than it is right now. Like, they should, in theory, be starting the upswing with a young quarterback and a roster that's still not horrible around the quarterback position. They just haven't had much at all at quarterback. And yeah, I know the Deshaun Watson thing is going to cripple them still for a little while, but, like, Myles Garrett has been there through really, really bad Cleveland Browns teams. You know, the Hugh Jackson era, the year of Freddie Kitchens. I mean, it sort of speaks for itself here, but, like, Myles Garrett was on the 0-16 Cleveland Browns team in 2017, and you didn't hear him making trade demands then. He stuck through it and was willing to put up with it. But now, all of a sudden, the Browns are too bad and he can't take it anymore. Like, this is where he's drawing the line on the team being bad? Or does he actually kind of want to be a Cleveland Brown and likes playing there and likes the team, and you give him a new contract and he'll be happy and stays in Cleveland for the rest of his career? Like, I kind of get the feeling that this is more of a public contract negotiating tactic rather than a very real deal that he's going to be traded somewhere else. And then even if somehow, some way, the Browns do find a way to make a Myles Garrett trade work, this doesn't feel like the right fit at the right time for the Chicago Bears. It doesn't feel like what Ryan Poles would do right now to keep building up this Bears team, even if, of course, it would be really fun to see Myles Garrett on this Chicago Bears defense. So we'll look at this from the Bears' perspective more closely about why maybe this just isn't exactly the right fit at the right time, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' stat projections. And if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 passing yard for you to get a win. So you pair that with one more correct pick, and you're already cashing out. They've got a bunch of different ways you can play in the big game or any of your other favorite sports, basketball, hockey, soccer, tennis. When the baseball season comes around, that's on PrizePicks as well. So download the PrizePicks app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly, win or lose on your first $5 lineup at PrizePicks. Run your game. It will be tough for the Cleveland Browns to trade Myles Garrett to anybody. And it would be tough for the Chicago Bears to absorb a Myles Garrett trade. As much as Garrett is a great player, an elite player, a Hall of Fame player, and the opportunity to add that kind of player does not come around very often, it's not necessarily the perfect time and place and moment for the Bears to make this specific trade. Yes, the Bears need edge help. Yes, Myles Garrett would be a huge, huge upgrade. And you've got Caleb Williams on a rookie contract. So you have more salary cap room to work around with as opposed to other teams that might be paying a quarterback $50 million. And so then it's hard to come in and bring in Myles Garrett and pay him what it ends up being $30 million a year or whatever that contract ends up looking like for him. That makes it a potential landing spot for the Bears. I totally understand it. But where the Bears are right now is not exactly the make the Myles Garrett splash type of move. Like, to some extent, like the Montez Sweat splash trade was kind of the big move for a pass rusher. But when you already have Montez Sweat as the tied for the third highest paid edge defender in the NFL based on average annual salary, he represents over 10% of the Chicago Bears salary cap is going into Montez Sweat. If you added Myles Garrett and paid him, one of these $30+ million contracts, then about 1/4 of your salary cap is going into Myles Garrett and Montez Sweat. Maybe that's worth it to have an elite pass rusher to pair with Montez Sweat and give you a super, super great defensive line. But that sure eats into everything else you want to do for your Bears team. And yes, it makes your team a lot better, but you got a lot of other work to do elsewhere on your roster that Garrett becomes a little bit more of a luxury than perhaps the Bears could afford. Now, like, if you could find some way to, maybe you ship off Montez Sweat, but all of a sudden, and you replace you trade Montez Sweat somewhere to get that off your books and then replace him with Myles Garrett. But all of a sudden, this gets into Madden types of trades that just don't actually happen in real life. The Browns don't have the salary cap space to trade Garrett and absorb Montez Sweat, so you'd have to get a third team involved, and you'd have a lot of hurt feelings there and negotiate. I mean, it's not how real life works there. So if you're paying Myles Garrett, say $30 million, and you're paying Montez Sweat $25 million, all of a sudden, you don't have much salary cap space to sign 2 new guards and a new center and some more tight end depth and another defensive tackle and maybe another safety in the mix here. And then you got to sign all your draft picks and you have to have money left over to make trades and fill out the depth farther down on your roster. You're not going to re-sign Keenan Allen at that point. You want to go out and get another wide receiver to add in this mix, even if they're not huge top money guys. It's just every dollar goes far, and the Bears need more than just one big splash free agent or one big splash trade on their defensive line. I mean, as you look at the Bears defensive line depth right now, they need more depth in addition to more talent. They need another defensive tackle with Dexter and Pickens and Billings to be in that rotation because everybody else is a free agent. Defensive end, I guess if you're getting Garrett, you could push down DeMarcus Walker and have Austin Booker and make that be your rotation. But you still are going to need quality depth there because you're one injury away from relying on guys in lineups that you just don't want to have to rely on as starters there. You need to have quite a depth of players at a variety of positions, and investing so much in Montez Sweat and Myles Garrett starts to make a lot of that a bit more untenable. And that's where it becomes challenging for the Chicago Bears. Because not only are you giving up the salary cap space to go get Myles Garrett, but you have to then also give up draft picks to go get him. Multiple draft picks. Definitely your first round pick plus, whatever it ends up being. A second round pick this year or a future third and this year's third, like you're then also taking away opportunities to keep building this roster up to support Caleb Williams in the best way possible. Like to me, the Myles Garrett trade is the trade you make when it's like, man, we're right on the edge of Super Bowl contention and you just need that one big splash to put you over the top. The Bears are still in the part of the process where you need to strengthen the foundation to get a nice crop of young players developing and building up on rookie contracts so that you can then have the space to go make the splash trade. But to give up all your salary cap space and some significant draft picks to go get Myles Garrett now, it's like it's a little bit too early in the team building process for the Bears. They need another full draft class and not give up those picks for Garrett. They need it to bring in more of those mid-level free agent signings to just fill all the holes so you feel like, man, this team is really close. And then that's when the big splash trade can take a team that's close and put you over the top. But the Bears still need to get close first before Myles Garrett can take them to the next level. I think of the Khalil Mack trade as a good example, right? Like 2018, that was a trade for a Bears team that needed that one big pass rusher to lift them up, and they go win 12 games that season and make the playoff push. Obviously, lose in the playoffs. We don't have to talk about what exactly happened there, but like that was a team that just needed that one Khalil Mack piece to really lift everything else up and help try and push them a little bit more over the top. The Bears aren't quite just there yet. Certainly a lot more pieces to keep building up on offense. And I would rather invest the draft picks, the salary cap space in like making Caleb Williams the best quarterback possible, as opposed to the luxury of elite pass rush, which helps Caleb Williams, but like put that money in three or four new offensive linemen. Put that money in more weapons, right? Whatever that ends up being. Tight ends, wide receivers. Put those draft picks in offensive linemen and weapons, right? And also help the defense along the way. But you don't need to put everything into this one big defensive move when this roster just needs a little bit more than just Myles Garrett. You'll still have such big holes that even Myles Garrett can't overcome all of those holes, as we're seeing with the Cleveland Browns. And so that's where it becomes challenging for the Bears. If this team is a little bit farther along, and okay, then you can leverage some picks and maybe leverage some future cap space and move the numbers around to fit Myles Garrett in at that point. But like, let's get there first and not jump the gun with a big splash Myles Garrett move. Still need to upgrade the pass rush, still need to add more to this defensive line, and you've got salary cap space and draft picks to be able to do so, even if it's not future Hall of Fame caliber Myles Garrett. Like the Bears don't need future Hall of Fame help. They need help. It doesn't have to be future Hall of Fame caliber help. They're not so desperate. It's not like they need this guy to completely resurrect their pass rush. They just need to add a little bit more, and they just need to keep developing the guys they have a little bit more. So we'll look at some of the other options that might fit Ryan Poles' style a little bit more in terms of fits that make sense that aren't breaking the bank and giving up a bunch of draft capital next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gametime. If you're looking to tickets for your next big events or maybe last-minute tickets for the big game this week, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime, it's never been easier. I have the Gametime app on my phone. I use it all the time, whether it's going to Bears games or going to other sporting events. I use it to buy tickets to go see comedians, concerts all the time. I just got tickets to go see Joe Gatto from the Impractical Jokers is coming. I was touring around the area, and I'm looking forward to go seeing that. And I got my tickets on the Gametime app because with Gametime, I can see the view from the seat I'm purchasing before I buy my tickets, so I know exactly what I'm getting with my ticket purchase. And I can also turn on Gametime's all-in pricing. So there aren't any added fees at the end of the checkout process that make the tickets cost way more than you thought you would. What you're getting up front is what you're seeing. So if you're ready to make your next event even better, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So Myles Garrett maybe isn't the most realistic option for the Bears, probably not the most realistic option for the Browns to even trade away at this point, but that doesn't mean the Bears are just going to stick with their pass rush as it was last year and just run it back with the same guys. Still plenty of options here. First of all, Trey Hendrickson from the Cincinnati Bengals always seems to be perennially an option available on the trade market. We'll probably do a separate podcast about him at some point in the future as if Hendrickson talk starts to heat up a little bit more. But even if we put the trade aside for a moment and say Bears got to keep their draft picks because they just need to draft young players. I kind of feel strongly about that this offseason. Like, you got 4 picks in the top 75. Those need to be 4 foundational pieces for your roster that are all going to be young and cheap, locked in on rookie contracts for at least 4 years. Like, this is team building, pivotal stuff for Ryan Poles. But even in free agency with the salary cap space the Bears have, plus the NFL draft, like, both should present some pretty decent options for the Bears to upgrade the defensive end position, upgrade the defensive tackle position, and generate more pass rush in 2025, even without Myles Garrett. Now, when you set the bar at Myles Garrett, everyone else is going to feel a little bit disappointing because they're not future Hall of Fame, all-pro, perennial dominating players who take over games in the same way. But again, that's not necessarily what the Bears need. It'd be nice, but it's not. Like, if the Bears don't get that, they're not going to have a good pass rush. You can get by with lesser options that are still exciting quality players that can add to your pass rush up front. Like, when you look in free agency, obviously there's a lot of interest in someone like Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles, who's playing in the Super Bowl. We'll see if the Eagles can afford to bring him back, or if, I'm guessing probably not. I'm guessing he's going to have a shot to hit the open market, but you could have Sweat on each end for the Bears, and he's not going to cost you quite as much as someone like Myles Garrett. Certainly, any top of the line free agent you try and sign is going to be a expensive player who wants big money there. Like, when you look at something like Josh Sweat, you're talking, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, 19, maybe even $20 million. But if that's $10 million a year less than Myles Garrett, that's a little bit more affordable here. Likely going to be less than Montez Sweat for comparison. Like, that's more the range the Bears could be looking at. And Josh Sweat's somebody who at 28 could, be 28 this season, like next season, I say, he could be a long-term piece as a part of your defensive line. Now, there's also a couple of older options in free agency that are not long-term pieces, but if you want to upgrade the pass rush and then say you sign a veteran defensive end and then also draft someone in the first, second, or third round even, and say, okay, bring back Khalil Mack for a year or two while that rookie plays in a rotation for a year or two and then takes over as the true long-term pair for Montez Sweat. I mean, Khalil Mack's 34. He's not a young man anymore. He's not quite the Khalil Mack he once was in Chicago, but if you're rotating him in Chicago with a rookie and Austin Booker and maybe even DeMarcus Walker, you could keep Khalil Mack fresh. You can get those younger players, get some snaps too, but not have to ask the younger players to do everything and not have to ask the older players to do everything. And something like that for Mack might be interesting. Price tag is going to be a big question mark there, given how much he's made over the course of his career, given that he does still play at a high level, but kind of the Keenan Allen question, right? Just at a different position. You could throw in another kind of question mark name who, how do you project his value is really going to be tough. But DeMarcus Lawrence from the Dallas Cowboys, he's 33, but he's coming off of he's still dealing with, but coming off of a Liz Frank injury this season that at this age, you wonder how big of an impact it can have. It's been a while since he's had double-digit sacks, but he made the Pro Bowl as recently as 2023 and 2022. When he played his last full season, 2023, he's still a Pro Bowl player, even with only 4 sacks that season. So he's not going to command nearly as much money as some of the other guys. Plus, he's injured, so he's probably not going to be available to sign right away in free agency. But, if you're looking for a guy who could just be a really good value, short-term option, you draft DeMarcus Lawrence, or you sign DeMarcus Lawrence. Maybe he's not ready till training camp, but then you draft a guy, like you still have options there to pair older player with young player in a rotation there that can be a little bit of the best of both worlds that are still like Josh Sweat, Khalil Mack, DeMarcus Lawrence. Like, these are Pro Bowl caliber players either now or at times in their careers or in the future for somebody like Josh Sweat, like that can be high impact difference makers, even if they're not Myles Garrett. Then you start to move down the list a little bit more. Someone like Chase Young from the New Orleans Saints, or Hassan Reddick from the Jets. Each one has their own kind of set of question marks there that are still going to get paid, but not nearly as much as some of the top flight guys. A name definitely to keep an eye on this offseason is Marcus Davenport, who spent last year with the Detroit Lions, but prior to that was a New Orleans Saint under Dennis Allen. So he's got the Ben Johnson connection and the Dennis Allen connection. He kind of flopped in Detroit a bit and hasn't necessarily been as productive as he was earlier in his career. Injuries the last couple seasons in Minnesota and Detroit have made it more difficult. But his first 5-6 years in New Orleans, he was making plays for them in a way that was impressive. I don't know if he ever hit double-digit sacks, but he had a nice 9-sack season in 2021. He had 6 sacks in 2019. Like, not a game-changing player, but someone with familiarity, with the size and length that Dennis Allen likes, and he's going to come as a bargain coming off of injury and struggling the last couple seasons. Like, that to me feels like a nice little sneaky fit there for someone who's not Myles Garrett, but that's okay. You sign Davenport, you draft somebody in the second or third round or whatever, and then all of a sudden you've got a pass rush with a lot of different options so that if somebody gets hurt, Davenport gets hurt again, you still have other guys that can rotate in there, but when healthy, you can build yourself a nice little collective pass rush. We'll briefly go through a couple of names in the NFL draft to keep an eye on. I don't think Abdul Carter from Penn State is going to be picked before the Bears are even on the clock. James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee might be in the mix there. Mike Green from Marshall. We talked last week about Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, who I think is playing his way into the Bears draft range with the 10th overall pick. I really think he's a Dennis Allen type of defensive end at 6'6", 290, size, length, strength, but moves really, really well at 290. Just a little bit raw of a prospect, but all the physical tools that you want that you can't teach. And you hope that Dennis Allen and the Bears defensive line coaches can unlock even more from him. So like say you draft him at 10, you pair him with a veteran free agent, even like a DeMarcus Lawrence or a Khalil Mack who's older, and Mack or Lawrence or whoever can handle the starting duties and the day-to-day stuff while Shamar Stewart still learns. He's going to need a rookie year to round out his technique and be more just technically sound as a pass rusher while still physically dominating with the tools that he has, so that a year or two from now, Shamar Stewart takes over as a starter. He's the best version of himself then, but you didn't have to put too much on his plate right away as a rookie, even as a 10th overall pick. Like, yes, you want that 10th overall pick to be a high instant impact player, but you got to remember every draft pick is not about what they do this year. It's what they do over the next 4 years, plus ideally a second contract with those players. So the Bears have pass rush options in the NFL draft. They have pass rush options in free agency. They don't need to give up draft picks and a massive contract to Myles Garrett to upgrade their pass rush. It would be fun. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't necessarily think this is the time Ryan Poles would make a move like that. A year from now, if Myles Garrett's still in Cleveland and demands a trade again, and the Bears are, say the Bears win 10 games this season and make a short playoff run, and they just need that one pass rusher to put him over the top, that's when all of a sudden let's mortgage the future and go get Myles Garrett to go on that run then. I just don't think now is exactly that time when you have other pass rush options available. If Trey Hendrickson indeed does become more available, if there's more steam for any other pass rushers to Chicago, you could be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. I co-host Tuesday mornings Locked On NFL every week with Tyler Rowland in the morning. We talked about Myles Garrett landing spots, including the Chicago Bears, plus some other teams the Bears might be competing with if Myles Garrett does move. Plus, we did a little bit of a Super Bowl preview looking at what could be the pitfalls for the Chiefs and the Eagles, how either team may end up losing on Super Bowl Sunday. So go check out Locked On NFL in the mornings with Tyler Rowland, and it comes out twice a day, also in the afternoon, a second episode with Tony Wiggins each day, wherever you find podcasts or on YouTube. Make sure you come back, make Locked On Bears your first listen again tomorrow for another opportunity to bear down.